I used to be the go-to person in my family until I decided to say no. After that, they took over my birthday celebration, and what occurred afterward will surprise you. Hey, I'm Ryan. I'm 32, live in Denver, Colorado, and work as a web developer. If I were to describe my role in the family, I'd say I'm the one who keeps everything running smoothly. Emotionally, that's my mom Diane's job, and socially, it's my dad Robert's strength. I'm the one everyone turns to when something goes wrong, whether it's a dispute that needs settling, errands that need running, or financial help when things are tight. You'd think all this would make me the favorite, but in my family, things are never that straightforward. I'm the middle child. Mark, my 37-year-old older brother, is married to his college sweetheart and is the embodiment of the golden child. He's a corporate lawyer with a flawless track record, and my parents constantly boast about him. And why wouldn't they? He's successful, well-regarded, and always composed. Then there's my younger sister, Sophie, who's 28. She's the youngest and the rebel in the family, impulsive and carefree, often leaving chaos behind her, which somehow only adds to her charm in my parents' eyes. They describe her as free-spirited, or say she's just figuring things out. As for me, I'm the one they don't worry about, the dependable one who keeps everything in order. I was the reliable child. Good grades, no trouble, and I started working part-time as soon as I could. My parents never had to check in on me like they did with Mark or Sophie. I was just the steady one, the one who kept things going. I think they appreciated that, but it also meant I wasn't always in the spotlight. Mark shone for his successes. He graduated top of his class, secured a high-paying job, and bought a house before hitting 30. My parents couldn't stop bragging about him. On the other hand, Sophie got attention for her bold adventures, like dyeing her hair electric blue in high school or moving to Chicago with no plan or job prospects. My parents would shake their heads, frustrated, but still praised her for being adventurous. Me? I stayed out of the spotlight, just doing what was needed. At first, I didn't mind this. It felt good to be the dependable one, the person everyone could count on. But over time, I realized that being dependable also meant being taken for granted. If there was an argument between Mark and Sophie, I was the one who had to step in and mediate. When Sophie needed help moving apartments, it was me loading up my car. If my parents faced unexpected costs, I was the one who quietly helped cover the difference. Yet, despite all my efforts, it never seemed like I was truly seen or appreciated. For years, I told myself this was just how families worked. Mark was busy with his high-powered job, and Sophie was still finding her way, so it made sense for me to step up. Family is family, right? But recently, I started to question that. It all began a few weeks ago when Sophie called, crying. She had just lost her part-time job and couldn't pay her rent. She was panicking about getting evicted. I felt for her. But this wasn't the first time Sophie had gotten herself into trouble and expected everyone else to fix it. Of course, my parents rushed to comfort her, saying it was just a rough patch. They helped as much as they could, but when their money ran out, they came to me. This time, I said no. I was polite but firm. I told Sophie I couldn't help her financially but offered to help her look for a new job or find a cheaper apartment. She didn't take it well. "Wow, Ryan," she said, sarcasm dripping from her voice. "I guess it's nice to know where I stand with you." She hung up before I could reply. The next day, my mom called. "Ryan, honey, I know Sophie called you about her rent," she began, her tone already edging toward guilt. "She's really struggling, and Mark can't help right now. Maybe you could pitch in just this once." "Mom," I said, trying to stay calm, "I've helped Sophie a lot over the years. She needs to learn to handle things on her own." There was a long pause before she sighed. "I understand," she finally said, "but you know how she is. She's your sister, Ryan. Family is supposed to support each other. That phrase, family is supposed to support each other, had been used on me more times than I could count. Every time, it meant the same thing. Ryan is the one who supports everyone else. I wanted to argue, to explain how tired I was of always holding everything together, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. So I said, "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't help this time." The disappointment in her voice was unmistakable. "All right," she said softly. "I just thought you'd want to help. I guess I was wrong." The tension in the family has been palpable ever since. Sophie hasn't returned my calls, and my conversations with my parents have been strained. They think I'm being selfish, but for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty for saying no. It's strange. I've always been the one holding the family together, but now I'm starting to wonder. What happens if I stop? Will everything fall apart without me? Or will they finally start seeing me, not just as the fixer, but as a person with limits? A week before my 32nd birthday, my mom called unexpectedly. She sounded unusually cheerful. "Hi, Ryan," she said, practically singing. "How are you, honey?" "I'm good," I replied, cautious. "What's up?" "Well," she began, dragging out the words as if about to reveal something big. "Your birthday's coming up, and we've got a little surprise planned for you. Don't make any other plans." That stopped me in my tracks. My family planning something for me? That was new. My birthdays were usually quiet. A cake, a few cards, maybe dinner at my parents' house if they weren't busy. Compared to the extravagant parties Mark had, or the over-the-top celebrations Sophie had, mine were always low-key. I never expected much, so I usually made my own small plans. "A surprise?" I asked, trying not to sound too skeptical. "Yes," she said, her enthusiasm evident. "It's going to be special this year. Just wait and see." I hung up, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me was touched. Maybe this was their way of showing they appreciated everything I'd done for them. Perhaps, for once, they noticed how much I'd sacrificed over the years. Another part of me remained cautious. My family didn't have the best history of making me feel like a priority, so I didn't want to get my hopes up. Over the next week, I kept my expectations low, but I couldn't help wondering what they might be planning. A dinner, a small party, even something as simple as a heartfelt speech. The idea of being celebrated felt exciting, and I started to feel hopeful. My birthday arrived, and I made sure to keep my schedule clear, just like my mom had asked. I even dressed up a bit. Not fancy, just a nice shirt and jeans. When I pulled up to my parents' house that evening, I noticed a few extra cars in the driveway. My heart lifted. It looked like they had really gone all out. As soon as I entered the house, a loud chorus of "Surprise!" greeted me. The living room was full of people. Family friends, and even a few old co-workers I hadn't seen in years. There were streamers half-heartedly taped to the walls, balloons floating around, and a table covered with snacks and a store-bought cake. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear they had put effort into it, and I couldn't help but smile. "Happy birthday, Ryan," my mom said, rushing over to hug me. "Were you surprised?" "Yeah," I said, genuinely smiling. I didn't see this coming. For the first hour, I mingled with the guests, catching up with old friends and enjoying the attention. It felt nice to be the center of attention for once. Mark and his wife Rachel were there, looking as polished and charming as ever. Sophie and her fiancé Liam showed up late, gave me a quick hug, and then disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in a long while, it felt like I was the one being celebrated. But then, about halfway through the evening, my mom clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "Okay, everyone," she said, her voice bright and commanding. "I just want to take a moment to say a few words about our wonderful Ryan." I froze. I wasn't used to being the focus of any speech. Maybe this was it, the moment I had been hoping for. "First of all," she said, smiling warmly at me. "We're so proud of Ryan for everything he's accomplished." She beamed at me. "But while we're all here, I also want to share some exciting news about the family." I blinked, my smile faltering. "Exciting news? What did that have to do with my birthday?" She turned to Mark, who was near the fireplace with Rachel. "Mark recently got a big promotion at work," my mom announced, smiling proudly. "He's now the head of his department." The room erupted into applause. My mom rushed over to hug Mark, her voice full of pride. "We're so proud of him." "Mark," she said, "you've worked so hard for this." My mom's pride was evident in her voice. "Thanks, Mom," Mark replied modestly, as though the promotion wasn't a big deal. I clapped along with everyone else, but the knot in my stomach was undeniable. This was supposed to be my day, yet somehow Mark's promotion had stolen the spotlight. But that wasn't all. My mom's voice lifted in excitement. "We have even more wonderful news to share," she exclaimed, turning to Sophie, who was sitting on the couch with Liam. "Sophie and Liam are engaged," she announced. The room gasped in delight, followed by more applause. My parents practically tripped over themselves congratulating Sophie and Liam. My dad even raised his glass for a toast. "We couldn't be happier for you both," he said. Sophie showed off her ring, a small but elegant diamond. Everyone oohed and ahed over it, and Liam wrapped his arm around her, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Meanwhile, I stood frozen, holding an empty cup in my hand. My birthday had officially been hijacked. What was supposed to be my celebration had turned into a showcase for Mark's career and Sophie's engagement. I forced a smile, trying to hide my frustration, but inside, I was boiling. As if that wasn't enough, my mom walked over to me, holding an envelope. "Ryan," she said, smiling warmly, "we've got something for you too." I perked up slightly, hoping maybe this was finally my moment. I opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten note. My heart sank as I read the words inside. "As part of your birthday gift," my dad said, his tone proud, "we thought you might like to help Sophie with her wedding planning. You're so talented with design, so we figured you could create the invitations and coordinate with the vendors. And if you could chip in financially, that would be wonderful. Weddings are so expensive these days." The room erupted in applause again, as if this was the most thoughtful gift anyone could receive. People patted me on the back, saying things like, "That's so generous of you," and "Sophie is lucky to have you." I forced a smile, but inside, I was fuming. This wasn't a gift. It was a list of chores disguised as a birthday present. Instead of celebrating me, they had handed me more responsibilities and expected me to pay for it. Sophie walked over with a sweet smile. "Thanks, Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with fake gratitude. "I knew I could count on you." I swallowed hard, keeping my emotions in check. This wasn't about me at all. It was about them. Once again, I was the afterthought, the reliable one who'd handle everything without complaint. But this time, I wasn't sure I could. I stepped outside into my parents' backyard, letting the cool evening air hit my face. The laughter and chatter from the party buzzed faintly behind me, but out here, it was quiet. I sat on the steps leading to the lawn and stared at the sky. It was a clear night, the stars faint against Denver's light pollution. I tried to focus on them, to let their stillness calm me, but my mind was racing. Inside the party, Mark was basking in the glow of his promotion, Sophie was soaking up congratulations for her engagement, and my parents were practically glowing with pride. And me? I was out here alone, trying to process how what was supposed to be my birthday had turned into just another event where I was an extra in their lives. I heard faint voices drifting through the open window. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but one line caught my attention and froze me in place. "Ryan should step up," my mom was saying to someone, her tone firm. Mark has so much on his plate, and Sophie deserves the perfect wedding. Ryan doesn't have a family of his own, so it's not like he's too busy. I just don't understand why he's being so difficult. My chest tightened as the words sank in. She wasn't defending me. She wasn't trying to understand my side. She was justifying their expectations of me and painting me as the problem. A mix of frustration, sadness, and anger boiled inside me. I'd spent years being the reliable one, the one who held everything together. And now, when I was asking for just a little consideration, I was the difficult one. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time I'd felt like this, but tonight, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep doing this, not for them, and not for myself. I got up from the steps and walked back inside, my expression neutral despite the storm inside me. The party was loud and chaotic, with people laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. I weaved through the crowd, ignoring the quick greetings and pats on the back, and found my parents in the kitchen talking with a group of relatives. "Hey," I said, clearing my throat. "Can we talk? Just the family?" My mom turned to me, startled. "Right now, Ryan? Everyone's having such a good time. Can it wait?" "No," I said firmly. "It can't." The room fell silent, and my dad exchanged a look with my mom before shrugging. "All right," he said. "Let's step into the living room." We gathered in the living room, my parents, Mark, Sophie, and me. The air was thick with tension as I stood before them, my heart pounding in my chest. "I want to talk about this party," I began, keeping my voice steady. "I really appreciate the effort, but this doesn't feel like a celebration for me. It feels like it's about everyone else." Sophie immediately rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "Oh, here we go." I ignored her and pressed on. "Mom, Dad, I know you meant well, but the speeches about Mark's promotion and Sophie's engagement, that wasn't what I was expecting tonight. This is supposed to be my birthday, but somehow it feels like I'm just here to cheer for them." My mom frowned, her tone defensive. "Ryan, that's not fair. We wanted to celebrate everyone. It's not all about you." I felt my frustration bubbling to the surface, but it was supposed to be. It's not like I get a party every year. This was supposed to be special. Instead, I get handed a list of wedding tasks, like it's my job to make Sophie's day perfect. Sophie huffed, throwing her hands up. "Oh, come on, Ryan. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. We thought you'd be happy to help. You're always good at this kind of stuff." Mark chimed in, his tone condescending. "Yeah, man. It's not like you have kids or a family of your own to worry about. You've got the time." I turned to him, my voice cold. "That's the problem. You all assume I have nothing better to do just because I'm single. But my time matters too. My life matters." "You're being dramatic," Sophie snapped. "You always make everything about you." I felt my hands clench into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Sophie, I've spent years helping this family, paying for things, organizing events, stepping in whenever someone needed something. And I've done it because I wanted to, not because I had to. But tonight, this isn't help. This is you expecting me to drop everything and be your wedding planner? If it's not that big of a deal," she shot back, "you're just being selfish." That word hit me harder than I expected. I looked at her, my voice rising slightly. "You think I'm selfish? After everything I've done for this family, you're going to call me selfish because I finally said no?" My mom stepped in, her tone placating. "Ryan, no one is saying you're selfish. We just thought you'd want to be involved. This is a family event, and you're part of the family." I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. "Mom, I've always been treated like the one who's supposed to hold everything together. But when it's about me, when I need support, I get brushed aside. This party proves that. It's not about celebrating me. It's about what I can do for everyone else. My dad, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. You're blowing this out of proportion, Ryan. The party was for everyone, not just you. Stop acting like a spoiled child. That was the final straw. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay composed. You know what? I'm done. Done with what? Sophie asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Done being the family's default helper, I said firmly. I'm not taking on your wedding tasks, Sophie. I'm not going to be your safety net anymore. From now on, I'm focusing on my life. My mom's face fell. Ryan, don't say that. We need you. No, I interrupted, my voice steady. You need me to do things for you, but you don't value me as a person. If you did, you wouldn't dismiss my feelings like this. I've given so much to this family and gotten so little in return. Mark scoffed. Oh, come on. You're acting like we've never done anything for you. I looked at him, my voice cold. Name one time. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sophie looked away, arms crossed. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. I love you all, I said, my voice softening. But I can't keep living like this. I need to step back for my own sake. With that, I turned and walked out of the room. No one followed me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Walking out of that living room felt like stepping off a stage I'd been performing on my entire life. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But there was also guilt gnawing at the edges. Was I really abandoning my family? Was I being selfish? These questions swirled in my mind, but for once, I didn't let them take over. Instead, I focused on one thought. I had done the right thing for myself. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. The family group chat, however, was buzzing. Sophie had already fired off a string of messages, starting with, Ryan ruined the party last night. She followed it up with her usual dramatics, claiming I was turning my back on the family and on her big moment. Mark soon added his usual condescending tone to the conversation. Seriously, Ryan, that was immature. You need to grow up and stop making everything about you. I stared at the messages for a while, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to respond, to list every sacrifice I'd made for them over the years. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They didn't want to understand. They just wanted me to fall back in line. With a sigh, I muted the group chat and set my phone aside. That day, for the first time in a long time, I focused entirely on myself. I went for a run, something I hadn't done in weeks. I stopped by a local coffee shop and spent hours working on a photography project I had neglected for months. It felt good to reconnect with parts of myself that I had pushed aside to make room for everyone else's needs. In the following weeks, I began building a life that felt like mine again. I signed up for a photography class I had always wanted to take, joined a local trivia group that met on Wednesday nights, and even started hiking on weekends, exploring trails outside Denver that I'd only ever heard about. These small changes made me realize just how much energy my family had drained from me over the years. Of course, the guilt trips didn't stop. A few days after the party, my mom called, her voice heavy with disappointment. Ryan, I don't understand what's gotten into you, she said. Why are you being so difficult? Your sister needs you right now. Mom, I said, keeping my tone steady. I've been there for Sophie and all of you more times than I can count. But I need to start setting boundaries. I can't keep sacrificing my time and energy for everyone else. She sighed, and I could picture her shaking her head on the other end of the line. But we're family, Ryan. Family supports each other. That's a two-way street, Mom, I replied, and I don't feel like I've been supported in return. I'm not saying I don't love you or that I don't care. I'm saying I need to take care of myself too. She didn't have much to say after that. We hung up, and for a while the calls stopped. But Sophie found other ways to make her feelings known. A mutual friend told me Sophie had been complaining to anyone who would listen about how selfish I was being. Apparently, her wedding planning was hitting major snags, and without me to step in, things weren't going smoothly. Meanwhile, Mark stuck to his usual pattern, too busy with work to get involved in the family drama, but still taking occasional potshots at me in the group chat. "Hope you're enjoying all your free time, Ryan," he wrote once, followed by a winking emoji. I didn't bother replying. For the first time, I wasn't letting their opinions control me. I wasn't dropping everything to fix their problems, and while it wasn't easy, it was freeing. I started reconnecting with friends, people I hadn't seen much of because I was always too busy dealing with family obligations. Jake, my best friend since college, was the first to call me out. "Man, where have you been?" he asked one Saturday morning as we grabbed coffee. "You used to be the guy organizing game nights, and now you're like a ghost." I laughed a little, embarrassed. "You know how it is. Family stuff." He raised an eyebrow. "Family stuff? Are you being their unpaid assistant?" His words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. "Maybe a little of both," I said with a shrug. "Well, good for you if you're finally drawing some lines," Jake said. "You deserve to have your own life, Ryan." Hearing that was like a breath of fresh air. For so long, I'd been caught in this cycle of putting everyone else first. It was exhausting, but it felt normal, like that's how things were supposed to be. Now, I was starting to realize it didn't have to be that way. Meanwhile, the cracks in my family's dynamic were beginning to show. Without me to step in, tensions between Sophie and my parents began to escalate. A mutual friend told me Sophie had gotten into a massive argument with my mom over the wedding guest list. My dad, true to form, stayed on the sidelines, claiming he was too busy to get involved. I felt a twinge of guilt when I heard about the chaos, but I reminded myself it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. They'd spent years relying on me to keep the peace, and now they were finally seeing what happened when I wasn't there to do it. One evening, my mom called again. This time, she didn't try to guilt me, at least not directly. Instead, she gave me a detailed rundown of all the ways Sophie's wedding planning was falling apart. I could tell she was hoping I'd offer to step in, but I didn't take the bait. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," I said. "I hope it works out." There was a long pause before she replied. "You really won't help, will you?" "No," I said firmly. "I won't." She sighed, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. But for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to fix it. The more time I spent focusing on myself, the more I realized how much I'd been neglecting. I wasn't just reclaiming my independence, I was rediscovering parts of myself that I'd almost forgotten. For years, I'd been so caught up in being the dependable one, the fixer, that I'd lost sight of who I was outside of my family. Now, I was starting to figure that out again, and honestly, it felt incredible. When my 33rd birthday rolled around, I decided to keep things simple. No big parties, no drama, no family obligations. Just a quiet dinner with a few close friends at a cozy restaurant downtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it was exactly what I wanted. We sat around a small wooden table, the kind that wobbles slightly when you lean on it, sharing stories and laughing over good food. My best friend Jake raised his glass midway through the meal, grinning from ear to ear. "To Ryan," he said, looking right at me, "for finally living his best life." Everyone laughed and clinked their glasses together. Jake's toast might have been half joking, but it hit me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself instead of bending over backward to meet someone else's expectations. After dinner, we walked around downtown, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier rain. I soaked in the moment, letting myself feel the freedom I'd worked so hard to reclaim. That night, When I got home, I sat on the couch with a slice of leftover cake, staring out the window at the Denver skyline. The city buzzed quietly in the distance, but my apartment felt peaceful. I thought about everything that had happened over the past year, the fights, the boundaries I'd set, the life I was slowly building for myself. I missed the idea of a close-knit family, the kind you see in movies or hear about from friends, but I'd come to accept that my family wasn't like that, and that was okay. I didn't need to keep sacrificing myself to earn their approval or love. In the months after I walked out of that birthday party, things had shifted, both in my family and in me. Sophie's wedding went ahead without my involvement. Although I heard from a mutual friend that it was a chaotic affair, my parents helped as much as they could. But without me to step in and take over, there were plenty of missteps along the way. Sophie didn't invite me to the wedding, just as she'd threatened. At first, it stung more than I wanted to admit. But on the day of her wedding, as I hiked through a quiet trail outside the city, I realized I didn't feel sad about missing it. For once, I wasn't tied up in their chaos. I was free. Mark stayed true to form, throwing the occasional passive-aggressive comment into the group chat. But I didn't engage. My dad mostly stayed silent, as he always had, while my mom made a few attempts to guilt me back into the fold. "Ryan, things just aren't the same without you," she said once, her tone heavy with regret. "They're not supposed to be, Mom," I replied gently. "I'm not saying I don't love you all, but I can't be everything for everyone anymore." Eventually, even her calls became less frequent. They weren't cutting me off, but I could tell they were trying to figure out how to navigate this new version of me. One with boundaries, one who didn't automatically drop everything to help. I had wondered if my absence would force them to grow, to take on some of the responsibility I'd shouldered for years. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but I'd stopped feeling responsible for fixing them. And that was enough. I spent the rest of my 33rd birthday in quiet reflection. The next morning, I woke up to find a few text messages from my family. Sophie had written, "Happy birthday, Ryan," with no additional sentiment. Mark's message was even shorter. "Hope it's a good one." My mom's text was more personal. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I hope you have a wonderful day. We miss you." I stared at her message for a long moment before typing out a reply. "Thanks, Mom. I miss you too." It was true. I did miss her, and in some ways, I missed all of them. But I didn't miss the dynamic that had existed between us. I didn't miss the feeling of being used, of being taken for granted. Later that week, I hung a framed photo in my apartment. It was one I'd taken during a recent hike, a wide shot of a sunrise breaking over the mountains. The golden light spilled across the peaks, the colors vivid and alive. It was one of my best shots, and it reminded me of the person I was becoming, someone who valued himself, who prioritized his own happiness. I knew I still had a long way to go. Boundaries are hard to set, but even harder to maintain. There would be more calls, more guilt trips, more moments where I'd have to remind myself why I'd taken this path in the first place. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the right track. As I sat on my balcony that evening, watching the sun dip below the city skyline, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't settle for being treated like an afterthought again. I wouldn't let guilt pull me back into the cycle of self-sacrifice. I deserved better than that, and from now on, I would make sure I got it. For the first time, I felt at peace. And that, I realized, was the best gift I could have given myself.